Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the flight deck of the Airbus 3A.
Behind me is the final A380, just flew in from the Airbus factory.
Airbus was supposed to deliver 820 aircraft this year. They didn't. In fact, they just cut that number down to 790. That's 30 fewer planes than planned, which translates to billions in delayed revenue and a humiliating public admission that something is very, very wrong.
Passengers around the world have been told to expect disruption and delays as airlines work to install urgent software modifications to thousands of Airbus planes.
While Boeing slowly claws its way back from its own nightmare, Airbus is stumbling over problems nobody saw coming. So what exactly went wrong? The production target that never was. Let's start with the number that matters: 820 aircraft. That was the promise. That was the goal Airbus executives confidently announced to investors, airlines, and the world. It wasn't a wild guess either. This was supposed to be the year Airbus proved it could scale production like never before, cementing its position as the undisputed leader in commercial aviation. But in early December, that target quietly got slashed to 790 planes. Now, 30 aircraft might not sound like much. You might think, what's the big deal? But in the world of commercial aviation, every single plane represents tens of millions of dollars in immediate cash flow. 30 planes is roughly $2 billion in delayed revenue. That's not pocket change, even for a company the size of Airbus. More importantly, it's a massive psychological blow. This isn't the first time Airbus has missed its target. Last year, they had to cut their numbers too. Missing once is unfortunate. Missing twice starts to look like a pattern. And patterns make investors nervous. They make airlines angry. They make Boeing executives smile. Because while Airbus is publicly admitting it can't keep up with its own promises, Boeing is ramping up 737 MAX production and talking about positive cash flow by next year. The question everyone is asking now is simple. If Airbus can't hit its targets when demand is at an all-time high, when will it ever? The fuselage scandal. Nobody saw coming. Here's where things get truly messy. The biggest reason Airbus had to cut its delivery target isn't just about engines or supply chain hiccups. It's about something far more fundamental. The fuselage panels on hundreds of A320 family aircraft were manufactured incorrectly. They're too thin. Someone, somewhere in the supply chain, milled these critical structural components to the wrong thickness. And now, over 620 aircraft have been flagged for inspection. That's not a typo. 620 planes. Some of them are already flying passengers around the world right now. Others are sitting on the assembly line in Toulouse and Hamburg, fully built but unable to be delivered because nobody knows if they're safe to fly. The company at the center of this disaster is Sofitec Aero, a Spanish subcontractor that supplies fuselage panels for the A320 family. The problem was discovered during routine quality checks, but the scope of the issue only became clear over the past few months. Airbus has been forced to go back and inspect planes that were delivered years ago, and airlines are understandably furious. Imagine you're an airline CEO who ordered 50 brand new aircraft. You've planned your routes, hired pilots, sold tickets, and then Airbus calls and says, "Actually, we need to delay delivery because the fuselage might not be thick enough." That's not just a logistical nightmare, it's a breach of trust. The financial impact is staggering. Every plane sitting on the ground waiting for inspection is a plane that can't generate revenue. Every delayed delivery is a customer relationship that gets strained just a little bit more. And every day this drags on, Boeing gets a little bit closer to catching up. Airbus has publicly stated they're working with Sofitec to resolve the issue, but resolving it and recovering from it are two very different things. This isn't a problem you fix with a software update or a recall notice. This is a structural quality crisis that will take months, maybe years, to fully resolve. The glider crisis returns. If you thought the fuselage scandal was bad, let's talk about the problem that just won't go away. Gliders. That's the industry term for fully assembled aircraft sitting on the tarmac with no engines. They look ready to fly, but they're useless without propulsion. And right now, Airbus has a lot of very expensive gliders parked outside its factories. The engine shortage has been a thorn in Airbus's side for years now, but it's gotten worse, not better. CFM International, which builds the LEAP engines used on many A320neo models, has fallen significantly behind schedule. Meanwhile, Pratt & Whitney is still dealing with a catastrophic defect in its geared turbofan engines. The problem involves rare metal contamination in critical engine components. Tiny impurities that shouldn't be there are causing parts to wear out far faster than expected. The result? Nearly one-third of the global A320neo fleet has been grounded at some point for engine inspections or replacements. Airlines are furious, and they're running out of options. Some carriers have resorted to cannibalizing 3-year-old aircraft just to get working engines for the rest of their fleet. Think about that for a second. Brand new planes, barely out of their warranty period, are being stripped for parts like old cars in a junkyard. That's how desperate the situation has become. The wait times for replacement engines are so long that it's actually more cost-effective for some airlines to dismantle a functioning aircraft than to wait for a new engine to arrive. And all of this puts Airbus in an impossible position. They can build planes faster than ever before, but if the engines aren't ready, those planes just sit. They can't deliver them, they can't get paid for them, and they certainly can't use them to hit their production targets. The engine crisis is a problem Airbus doesn't fully control, but it's a problem they can't escape either. Engine hell, when suppliers can't deliver. Let's dig deeper into why the engines are such a nightmare. It's not just one company or one problem. It's a tangled mess of metallurgy, supply chains, and broken promises. Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan engine was supposed to be a revolution, more efficient, quieter, and more reliable than anything that came before. But that revolution hit a wall when engineers discovered that powder metal used in certain turbine components was contaminated. The contamination is microscopic, but the consequences are massive. These engines are complex machines operating under extreme conditions. High temperatures, high pressures, constant vibration. Even a tiny defect can lead to catastrophic failure. So when the contamination was discovered, regulators had no choice but to ground affected aircraft and mandate inspections across the entire fleet. Pratt & Whitney has been working around the clock to fix the problem, but it's not something you can solve quickly. They've had to go back to their suppliers, audit their manufacturing processes, and redesign parts of the production line. Meanwhile, CFM International is dealing with its own issues. The LEAP engine is incredibly popular, which means demand is sky high. But ramping up production isn't as simple as building more factories. These engines require specialized materials, precision tooling, and highly trained workers. Any bottleneck in that chain, and the whole system slows down. Right now, both engine makers are behind schedule, and Airbus is paying the price. Every month of delay costs money. Every glider sitting on the tarmac is capital locked up doing nothing. And every frustrated airline is a potential future customer who might decide to take their business to Boeing instead. The worst part? Airbus can't do much about it. They don't build engines. They rely entirely on their suppliers. And when those suppliers can't deliver, Airbus is left holding the bag. The software bug from space. Just when you thought things couldn't get any stranger, let's talk about the software bug triggered by solar radiation. Yes, you read that right. Solar radiation. In late November, Airbus issued an emergency software fix affecting around 6,000 aircraft. The problem was a glitch in the flight control system that could be triggered by increased solar activity. Essentially, when the sun throws off certain types of radiation, it can interfere with the electronics on board the aircraft. In most cases, this interference is minor and goes unnoticed, but in rare situations, it can cause the flight control system to behave unpredictably. There was even a mid-air incident where a pilot briefly lost control of the aircraft, which was later linked to this bug. Nobody was hurt, but it was close enough to trigger alarm bells across the industry. Airbus moved quickly to develop and distribute a software patch, but the incident highlights just how complex modern aircraft have become. These aren't mechanical machines anymore. They're flying computers, and computers can have bugs. The solar radiation issue is particularly tricky because it's not something you can test for in a lab. You can't simulate space weather on demand. The only way to discover bugs like this is through real-world observation, which means they often don't show up until the planes are already in service. Fortunately, this particular problem has been resolved, but it's a reminder that even when everything else goes right, there are still invisible threats lurking in the background. And for Airbus, which is already juggling fuselage defects, engine shortages, and missed production targets, it's just one more thing to worry about. Boeing's shadow grows longer. While Airbus stumbles, Boeing is quietly making a comeback, and that should terrify Airbus executives. Just a few years ago, Boeing was in crisis mode. The 737 MAX was grounded worldwide after 2 deadly crashes. The company's reputation was in tatters, its production lines were frozen, and its future was uncertain. But Boeing has spent the last few years clawing its way back. The MAX is flying again. Airlines are ordering it again, and most importantly, Boeing is ramping up production to over 42 aircraft per month. They're promising positive cash flow by next year. Meanwhile, Airbus is cutting delivery targets and dealing with quality scandals. The tables are turning, and the industry is taking notice. Airlines that were once loyal to Airbus are starting to hedge their bets. Orders that might have gone to the A320 are now being split between Airbus and Boeing. The competitive advantage Airbus enjoyed during Boeing's darkest days is shrinking fast. And here's the kicker. Boeing's problems were largely self-inflicted. They rushed the MAX to market, cut corners on training, and paid the price. But they learned from it. They've overhauled their safety culture, tightened quality controls, and rebuilt trust with regulators. Airbus, on the other hand, is dealing with problems that are harder to control. Supplier defects, engine shortages, even space weather. These aren't things you can fix with better management alone. They require coordination across a sprawling global supply chain, and that's incredibly difficult. If Boeing continues its recovery trajectory while Airbus continues to stumble, we could see a real shift in the balance of power in commercial aviation. And that would be a remarkable turnaround. The backlog that could break Airbus. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Airbus has over 8,600 aircraft on order. That's a record backlog. It's a sign of incredible demand, but it's also becoming a serious problem. At the current production rate, it would take Airbus more than 10 years to deliver all those planes. 10 years. Think about that from the perspective of an airline. You place an order for 50 new aircraft because you need to expand your fleet. You've done the math, secured the financing, planned your growth strategy, and then Airbus tells you it'll be 5, maybe 7 years before you get your planes. What do? Some airlines are sticking with Airbus because they've already invested in training, maintenance infrastructure, and parts inventory. Switching to Boeing would be expensive and complicated, but others are getting frustrated. United Airlines, Indigo, and several other major carriers have publicly expressed concerns about delivery delays, and when customers start complaining loudly, that's when you know you have a real problem. The backlog is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it shows that demand for Airbus planes is strong. On the other hand, it shows that Airbus can't keep up. And if they can't deliver on time, those orders start to lose value. Airlines might cancel, they might switch to competitors, or they might demand compensation for delays, which eats into Airbus's profit margins. The pressure is enormous. Airbus needs to ramp up production to clear the backlog, but they can't do that if they're dealing with fuselage defects, engine shortages, and quality crises. It's a vicious cycle, and right now, there's no clear way out. So here we are. Airbus, the company that was supposed to dominate the skies, is instead fighting fires on multiple fronts. Fuselage defects, engine delays, software bugs, and a backlog so large it might take a decade to clear. Meanwhile, Boeing is rising from the ashes, and customers are getting impatient. The question isn't whether Airbus will survive. They will. But the question is whether they can regain the momentum they've lost, or if this is the beginning of a much longer struggle.